high-level political forum.
This meeting is being recorded.
Equality event, the power of partnerships, sustainability, and resilience for gender equality, navigating rapidly changing times. My name is Lorena Aguilar, and I will be your moderator. GE is the world's leading initiative to unlock political will, energy, and large-scale investments for gender equality, to ensure progress on the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, and in support of building back equal towards a more on agenda.
Lorna, this is IT. Can you please hold your video?
Who have made us.
No, let's try it again. Okay.
Toward the global acceleration plan were made in Paris in July 2021. The one-year milestone is a critical moment for engagement, reflection, and acceleration of progress. This high-level strategic roundtable will spotlight progress, including the uniquely positioned multi-stakeholder partnership mode of GE as a mechanism of actions toward achieving the 2030 agenda. We're here today with a great panel of leaders who represent the unique multi-stakeholder nature of generation equality. There are AC leaders and compact board members that very much embody the ambition and the inspiration of generation equality. The diversity of speakers present here represents their action coalition and the constituency that make up generation equality. Before I turn to them, there's few housekeeping items that I would like to go over. Please note that we have interpretation services available in different languages. There is Spanish, French, Arabic, and Russian simultaneously interpretation, and we also have international sign language and closed captioning. To select your preferred language, as you're gonna see on the screen, go to the lower part of the screen and click on the world icon, and to activate the closed captioning, click in the double CC button, as you can see from the screen that we're showing. We have muted you all, but you can still use the chat box function to share any comments or questions you may wish to direct to the panelists. The questions from the chat box will be dealt with time permitting. And please use the chat box responsibly. No harassment will be tolerated. If organizers deem any comments distasteful, attendees will be removed from the event. And with those introductory words and housekeeping, I will now have the pleasure and the honor to introduce the introductory speakers. Please welcome from UN Women, the UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Director, Sima Bahaus. From France, Her Excellency Delphine O, France Ambassador for Generation Equality. And from Mexico, Nadine Gasmond, President from InMujeres. So, Ms. Sima Bahaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, dear excellencies, partners, and friends. And thank you, Lorena, for your kind introduction and your government's leadership in generation equality through the Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. We are honored to have you all with us today. It is also my pleasure to welcome you to this side event, co-hosted by France, Mexico, and UN Women, to mark the one-year anniversary of this Generation Equality Forum, a critical moment for further active engagement. It is also a critical moment of stock-taking for the United Nations. For the past 2 weeks, 44 member states have presented voluntary national reviews at the high-level political forum, updating on progress made on Sustainable Development Goals. Progress on SDG 5 has also been reviewed. The world, my dear friends, my dear partners, dear excellencies, the world is off track. We all need to accelerate our actions to achieve the SDGs and Agenda 2030, and of course, within all those, SDG 5. Later today, we hope that the high-level political forum will adopt its ministerial declaration, which will include a focus also on SDG 5. All of us together must continue to maintain momentum for gender equality. I want to express my appreciation to France and Mexico for their visionary leadership since the inception of Generation Equality and their unwavering commitment to gender equality and Agenda 2030. Thank you, Madame Delphine, and thank you, Nadine. Such leadership is needed now more than ever as we move into the next phase of generation equality with a focus on implementation and acceleration of results. We are living through times when women's rights are being rolled back. COVID-19 triggered escalations in domestic violence and negative repercussions for women's jobs and incomes. Figures show us that gender inequality gap has widened, that it will take more than 135 years to achieve full equality. The war on Ukraine has sent millions, largely women and children, fleeing from its scourge. It also drives global food, energy, and finance insecurities. Conflicts in different parts of the world, from Yemen to Ethiopia to the Sahel and elsewhere, are affecting women and girls most and exacerbating inequalities and injustice. Women in Afghanistan are facing damaging setbacks to their rights. And in recent weeks, we have seen setbacks to sexual and reproductive health. We must, however, remain steadfast in the face of such setbacks and in the face of all setbacks. Dear partners, Generation Equality is the world's initiative to unlock large and inclusive collaborative and investment for gender equality. Underpinned by the Beijing Platform for Action, it is demonstrating the promise of building back equal towards a more inclusive and sustainable world. It seeks to leverage not only SDG 5, but all of Agenda 2030 through a multi-stakeholder partnership model, which brings together governments, civil society, youth, private sector, philanthropies, IFIs, and the United Nations in mutual accountability. Since its inception, it has mobilized more than 2,000 commitments, financial, programmatic, policy, and advocacy. I applaud this. Dear partners, we now need to focus on the implementation and accountability of these commitments while calling on new partners to step up. The Generation Equality Acceleration Plan provides a path for the needed accelerated action. As we look ahead, I want to highlight 3 key priorities. First, we must ensure the existing commitments are delivered. During the General Assembly this coming September, UN Women will provide an accountability snapshot of the progress made. Second, we must generate new commitments, focusing on the issues and the regions where the potential remains untapped, such as in technology and innovation, which will be the focus of the 67th session of the Commission on the Status of Women next March 2023. And third, to continue to uphold and promote the unique multi-stakeholder and intergenerational nature of generation equality. On the margins of the General Assembly, we will announce the first group of members of the multi-stakeholder leadership group, which will help guide the next phase. These actions can help generation equality become a resilient and sustainable platform, and one which sits at the intersection of some of today's most critical issues: pandemic recovery, climate justice, food insecurity, and digital transformation. Generation equality is a priority for UN Women and for me as executive director. I remain fully convinced it will be key to overcoming setbacks and accelerating progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. Together, we will deliver on the promise of generation equality and the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you and wish you the best in this side event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bahaus, for reminding us that we need to continue to maintain momentum for gender equality and your commitment to the GEF journey, encouraging the new commitments and linking it to the accountability momentum at UNGA. Now we will have the intervention from Delphine O, France Ambassador for Generation Equality, which is through a pre-recorded video message.
Bonjour à toutes et à toutes. Je suis particulièrement ravie de pouvoir ouvrir et coparrainer cet événement au nom de la France, aux côtés du Mexique et d'ONU Femmes, à l'occasion du Forum politique de haut niveau. Juste un an après la tenue du Forum Génération Égalité à Paris, qui s'est tenu du 30 juin au 2 juillet 2022, le Forum politique de haut niveau est le moment idéal pour dresser un premier bilan du Forum, être un espace de dialogue entre les partenaires du Forum et envisager les prochaines étapes ensemble. À l'occasion du premier anniversaire, nous avons organisé la semaine dernière un événement de célébration en France avec les partenaires français du Forum pour rendre compte de la mise en œuvre de nos engagements et continuer la mobilisation autour du Forum Génération Égalité. À l'heure où les femmes et les filles font face à de multiples crises sanitaires, politiques et humanitaires, ou encore climatiques, l'héritage du Forum Génération Égalité et la mobilisation historique qu'il a engendrée est aujourd'hui plus que jamais nécessaire. Alors que les droits et santé sexuelle et reproductifs, et notamment le droit à l'avortement, sont de plus en plus menacés et que les droits des femmes et des filles sont régulièrement remis en question, le Forum Génération Égalité demeure l'espace multi-acteurs le plus efficace pour faire avancer l'égalité de genre. Je suis particulièrement fière de la mobilisation que nous avons réussi à faire émerger l'année dernière, au travers d'un format multi-acteurs innovant et que nous avons la responsabilité collective de continuer à nourrir et à enrichir. La France continuera de prendre toute sa part dans les prochaines étapes du Forum et de continuer à le soutenir, à le promouvoir dans l'ensemble de sa diplomatie féministe. Notre mobilisation française s'illustre au sein de la coalition sur l'autonomie corporelle et les droits et santé sexuelle et reproductifs, dont la France est co-championne, aux côtés de plusieurs États, organisations de la société civile, organisations internationales et le secteur privé. À ce titre, la France s'est engagée à apporter une contribution de 400 millions d'euros entre 2021 et 2025, notamment en soutenant le programme UNFPA Supplies, en faveur de l'achat et de la distribution de méthodes de contraception. La France soutient également le programme SEMA, Shaping Equitable Market Access for Reproductive Health, qui favorise un accès équitable aux produits de santé sexuelle et reproductive, ainsi que l'Organisation pour le dialogue en faveur de l'avortement sécurisé, en Afrique de l'Ouest et du Centre, portée par l'ONG IPAS. Nous avons pu honorer, et nous en sommes très fiers, l'ensemble de nos engagements financiers pour l'année 2021 et continuerons à faire de même pour les prochaines années. Notre mobilisation est également politique. Les enjeux de droit et santé sexuelle et reproductive et la liberté à disposer de son corps sont une très forte priorité de la diplomatie féministe portée par la France et sur lesquels nous continuerons à nous mobiliser pleinement en France comme à l'international. Ces droits sont indispensables pour l'émancipation des femmes et des adolescentes et sont également ancrés dans les objectifs du développement durable 3 sur la santé et le bien-être pour toutes et pour tous et l'objectif du développement durable 5 sur l'égalité de genre. Nous nous devons de les protéger et de les promouvoir afin d'assurer à chaque femme un accès à ses droits. Le Forum politique de haut niveau cette année, en passant en revue l'objectif du développement durable dédié à l'égalité de genre, constitue une opportunité unique de placer l'action du Forum et les engagements pris par tous les partenaires comme étant une contribution significative pour l'atteinte de l'agenda 2030. Il est primordial que la mobilisation autour du forum soit reprise, valorisée et amplifiée dans des enceintes comme le HLPF pour faire progresser les droits des femmes et des filles d'ici 2030. Il est également une étape clé avant l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies, qui sera l'occasion de porter le bilan et les avancées du FGE et d'appeler d'autres partenaires à rejoindre le mouvement. L'objectif est donc double et rejoint les coalitions d'action lancées lors du forum. À la fois avancer concrètement sur l'égalité de genre et s'assurer que les enjeux de genre soient bien intégrés dans l'ensemble des autres sujets et dans tous les objectifs du développement durable. Je suis ravie d'assister à vos échanges pendant ce panel et de voir l'ensemble des actions que vous avez déjà toutes et tous pu déployer pour mettre en œuvre vos engagements pris lors du Forum Génération Égalité. Vous pouvez toujours compter sur la France pour continuer à porter une voix forte dans les instances multilatérales, mais également sur le terrain pour l'égalité de genre et les droits des femmes et des filles. Ensemble, nous continuons de construire la génération égalité.
I'm really sorry. I'm breaking through. I just want to thank Ambassador O for sharing the experience and motivation of France's leadership and commitment to generation equality, to encourage and inspire other member states to follow its leads. Now I have the honor of introducing Nadine Gasment, President of In Mujeres, also through a pre-recorded video message.
Hace poco más de un año, el Foro Generación Igualdad en México y París fueron testigos del lanzamiento de más de 2,000 compromisos trascendentales para el avance de la igualdad de género en coincidencia con el espíritu de la Plataforma de Acción de Beijing, nuestra hoja de ruta para alcanzar sociedades igualitarias, prósperas y en paz. Gracias al foro, logramos en conjunto con el gobierno de Francia, ONU Mujeres, organizaciones de la sociedad civil, juventudes, el sector privado, la academia y organizaciones internacionales sumar esfuerzos transformadores para movilizar la acción feminista por la igualdad en todo el mundo. México, como sede del Foro Generación Igualdad y como líder de la coalición por la justicia y los derechos económicos, reafirmó un camino histórico en la agenda feminista. En este encuentro global, el arduo esfuerzo de las y los líderes hizo posible impulsar un plan de aceleración global para la igualdad de género que refleja el trabajo de los diversos sectores que conformaron las 6 coaliciones de acción para el avance de los derechos de las mujeres y las niñas en todos los ámbitos. Específicamente, la Coalición para Acción sobre Justicia y Derechos Económicos fue diseñada para abordar los obstáculos estructurales a los que se enfrentan las mujeres y las niñas para su empoderamiento y autonomía económico. Así, en el marco de los compromisos suscritos en esta coalición de acción, desde el Gobierno de México, en conjunto con ONU Mujeres, lanzamos la Alianza Global por los Cuidados como un compromiso colectivo, multiactor, que impulsa acciones para promover una transformación cultural, garantizando el reconocimiento, la reducción y la redistribución del trabajo doméstico y de cuidados, así como su justa remuneración y la debida representación de las personas cuidadoras. Hoy, gracias a sus 70 miembros, la Alianza se ha constituido en un espacio de co-creación, cooperación y colaboración, en donde se comparten prácticas, se articulan diálogos y se genera incidencia y participación institucional, considerando los diferentes papeles de sus integrantes para implementar la agenda de cuidados desde el nivel local hasta el global. La Alianza ha puesto en marcha diversas acciones, Ha participado en foros internacionales como la sesión 66 de la CCW, la conferencia de cuidados del G7. Hemos creado comunidades de análisis globales, puesto en marcha talleres de intercambio de experiencias y además nos encontramos diseñando una comunidad global digital. Todas estas acciones concretas se llevan a cabo en coliderazgo con los integrantes, siguiendo en el espíritu de co-creación que nos dejó el Foro Generación Igualdad. A esto se le suman día a día nuevas propuestas de actividades para avanzar en la agenda de cuidados a nivel mundial. Acciones que los integrantes impulsan desde este espacio multisectorial y que tienen un impacto en la agenda internacional que propone poner en el centro de la recuperación la construcción de sociedades de cuidados. Desde México celebramos con orgullo y alegría el primer aniversario de este foro, una plataforma mundial que puso en el centro las demandas de las mujeres indígenas, organizaciones de base, juventudes y niñas para que su voz fuera escuchada y se movilizaran esfuerzos colectivos como es hoy la Alianza Global por los Cuidados. Es nuestro deber aprovechar la energía e impulso que nos dejó el foro para continuar promoviendo el cumplimiento de compromisos concretos en favor de la igualdad y para que todas las mujeres y niñas ejerzan plenamente en paz y libertad todos sus derechos.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nadine, for your message addressing the progress from the perspective of an AC leader with emphasis on the local action and the localization of the GEF, the Action Coalitions and the WPS Compact, and also by shedding light on the powerful example of the collective commitment to the Global Alliance for Care in the context of the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic. I now have the honor to start with our first section, in which I would like to introduce our 8 guest speakers. They will be first providing examples of progress on their commitments with the lens of building back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. I will first introduce all of them and then I will give them the word. So we have Ms. Margaret Kobia, Cabinet Secretary from the Government of Kenya, Ms. Aishaga Najib from the Youth Climate Lead Fridays for Future, Mr. Mark Malok Brown, President from the Open Society Foundation, Madame Bineta Diop, Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security for the African Union and the convener of African Women Leaders Network, Ms. Rachel Snow, Chief Population and Development Branch from UNFPA, Ms. Susanna Philippe, Executive Director Interim from the Women Enable International, Ms. Amelia Reges, Co-Convener of the Women Working Group on Financing for Development, and Ms. Katherine Townsend, Director of Policy from the Webb Foundation. So to start with your first example of providing progress on their commitment, we will have 2 3-minute interventions from our 8 guest speakers. So Ms. Margaret Kobia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for this opportunity. Kenya is very pleased to participate in this high-level political forum where we do recognize Generation Equality Forum was launched by His Excellency the President. That demonstrates the political will, and we have about 12 commitments. We also recognize COVID-19 pandemic was really a setback affecting health, human rights, economy, and slowed down gains made on gender equality. Therefore, Generation Equality Forum came as a commitment that brought focus both to work with the local partnership and international partners, thinking through how can we sustain, especially bringing women-led, youth-led, and also youth-led organizations to work together, which means the close focus has enabled us to really focus on gender-based violence as Kenya coordinates coalition on gender-based violence with the UK, Iceland, and 4 other countries. What we have been able to achieve, we are partners with the development partners, and we have been able to come up with a plan, a very clear plan that shows how we focus on the 12 commitments and ensure that the private sector, the civil society, the academia, development partners understand very clearly what is the deliverables. Through that, we have been able to conduct a research study that showed during the COVID pandemic, gender-based violence increased in Kenya by 92%. That set us into some alarming situation to know that we really need to focus through that structure how we identify how are we going to reduce from that 92%. In our plan, we have monitoring and evaluation implementation too, so that we can be able to make major progress. And as I will be saying much later, I will be very specific to say what are some of the celebrations we are having after 1 year. But I think what we have learned through the structure for implementing Generation Equality Forum, we have realized in government, we must be able to work with all the ministries that deal with education, deal with the ICT, deal with health, deal with even environment. So 7 government ministries directed by His Excellency the President are working together to be able to address issues to do with the gender-based violence. In addition, Generation Equality Forum kind of brought the initiative of working with the civil society, and we are now working with the civil societies who have come in our plan, and each civil societies decided which particular commitment they want to deliver. I think that was not something we were doing in the past, but now when we work with the civil society, the universities through academia, they are also carrying out the research. Let me also say one major contribution that Generation Equality Forum has done is also to advise on make a contribution towards economic policy on because women became very vulnerable during as an effect of the pandemic. So we have an economic forum that has benefited from Generation Equality and Generation Equality Forum that has been we are implementing now. We
Thank
also
you,
see.
Margaret.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your intervention, Margaret, and we look forward to hear more on what the government of Kenya has been achieving and doing. I will now ask Ms. Aisha Najib from the Youth Climate Lead Friday for Futures. The floor is yours, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Lorena. So Fridays for Future MAPA, which stands for Most Affected People and Areas, we have made a total of 6 commitments at Generation Equality Forum. A major focus of the work that we've been doing since Generation Equality Forum is to empower women and girls in all the diversities in regional, national, and local climate groups to take actions, providing them with visibility on all our media platforms and supporting educational programs focusing on grassroots communities and valuing their traditional ancestral knowledge. We've amplified women and girls-led projects and their stories by passing the platform to them. We collaborated with the Pass the Mic initiative to facilitate this and was supported by the UN Youth Envoys team, UNICEF, and more. We have also been working on capacity building programs by facilitating workshops, but also leveraging the connection and resources we have to empower grassroots organizations, thereby creating long-term collaborations. Another key area of our commitment is to take an intersectional lens on climate advocacy work. We have the great opportunity of highlighting the climate and gender nexus through our engagement at the CSW 66, facilitated by our Action Coalition, Feminist Action for Climate Justice. Our members participated at the CSW 66 Youth Forum, co-authored the youth recommendations, and even negotiated at the Vienna Cafe, thereby engaging in policy advocacy and addressing the pivotal policy implementation gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayijish, and we really look forward to hear more on the incredible work that Friday for the Future has been doing in this respect. I now have the honor of introducing Mr. Mark Malok Brown, President from the Open Society Foundations. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you all. And I feel very proud, actually, as a man leading a foundation such as Open Society, to be in solidarity with all of you, not just this morning, but in the programs of the Open Society Foundation. We made a 100 million pledge to the GEF. We've already committed over half that, and an awful lot of it is devoted either through our work on political leadership, to which we will return later, or through our support to the care economy, to this challenge that we all face of building back better and building back more inclusively. And just for the purposes of specific examples, let me refer to programs that we are doing in support of the care economy in both Brazil and Argentina, where we're trying to pilot approaches to including women in the design of these programs and including them as both the targets and beneficiaries of our activities, as we try to innovate and pilot approaches to both supporting those providing care, but ensuring that the care economy becomes more resilient going forward. So again, on behalf of all of us at Open Society, we've just launched a new intersectional approach in our global programs to ensuring that we support feminist groups and gender economy across the world. But as we do that, we proudly stand with all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your intervention and for the support that you have provided to our dreams for many of us that are here. I now have the honor to introduce Madame Bineta Diop, Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security, and the convener of African Modern Leader Network. Madame Bineta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. We are very honored to join the more than 170 signatory of the compact, and we are all encouraged by the step taken by all of us to implement over 1,000 actions to realize the promises that have been made to women and girls in conflict and crisis situation. So let me just say that, start by saying that we committed ourselves in the compact to implement over the next 5 years that focus on increasing women participation in humanitarian, political, peace and economic processes and decision making. And for that, let me start by highlighting what we have done in the African continent to make sure that we mobilize women at all levels. The Africa Women Leaders Network, supported by the African Union and the United Nations, have launched national chapters to mobilize women leaders, former head of state like Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, sitting head of state like Mama Samia of Tanzania, but also the young women. And right now we have 30 national chapters across the African continent with more than millions of women that come from the youth sector, but also from rural areas. So for us, leadership matters in all sectors, and women representation, but also the women's organizations. So let me just say also that women have borne the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic and are also at the front line of the fight and in the recovery process. And that's why we document also what have happened at national level, how organizations have been together to make sure that they are the backbone in the society to provide COVID tests, to provide masks, to provide support and sensitize and give information. And on that basis, that's why the women leaders with our patron, but also our partners, we have developed guidelines on gender responsive, for the implementation of the African Union guidelines that have been adopted by CDC, but all member states. So we have the gender policy within the implementation of COVID. Today, we are putting our mechanism for medicines in Africa in the summit where I'm attending right now. The mechanism should be implementing our own guidelines that have been adopted, developed by the women leaders, but be implemented by our head of states. So
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. And thank you for sharing the efforts that you're doing in Africa. And we look forward to hearing more about the great work that you're doing in the next segment in which you will be intervening as well. May I now call Ms. Rachel Snow, Chief Population and Development Branch from UNFPA. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. Apologies for that. Greetings and indeed, Madam Ambassador, Chair, and all the distinguished participants. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of UNFPA. UNFPA made 12 commitments last year, and they did so across 4 broad areas. And these included aspects of expanding comprehensive sexuality education, also expanding access to family planning, and indeed increasing women's rights for decision-making in key areas. But in light of this year's attention to education, of course, with the Transforming Education Summit coming up in September, and also in the interest of time, I'm going to focus explicitly on UNFPA's contributions in the last year on CSE. Okay, and now indeed, much of that work with governments, and some of those which were very targeted as a year ago, has been on facilitating national processes, often with CSOs and different sectors of government, to try and bring the CSE curriculum up to an international standard, at the same time accommodating, as you can imagine, many of the national specificities that are so important culturally and otherwise. 3 major points of progress on countries that were targeted. Indeed, first one of those is in Lao PDR, where the Ministry of Education and Support led a process facilitated by UNFPA, and it resulted into a very nice integration of new and unexpected areas into the CSE curriculum. Very similar in Tunisia, a very nice multi-stakeholder process, and out of that, a national sexuality education curriculum that is really very close to the international guidance. Similarly, there was a coalition meeting in the context of East and Southern Africa, and this was very, very much about teachers training efforts, and that in fact led to a very specific curriculum for young people with disabilities, which is of course a critical area going forward. Just to turn to the out-of-school work on CSE, which was also a commitment, and to remind us, there's over 250 million children out of school. Much of this, apologies for the train noise, much of this focused on digital work. And this, of course, began under COVID, this movement to making sure that things were accessible online. In Latin America and the Caribbean, a center of excellence has been established, and this is indeed leading on a wide range of online digital tools. Likewise, Albania, likewise, Iran. And I mention those because, again, those were countries itemized a year ago for special commitments. It's really important in the context of this, the focus on partnerships. Let me also mention the Global Partnership Forum on CSE, which was launched last year, and in June held an extremely successful global symposium on CSE with over 800 registered participants.
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, sorry, and thank you very much, and we'll talk later.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing examples of progress that you have done in Laos, Tunisia, and Eastern Southern Africa. And we'll have an opportunity for a further interchange and to enhance more the work, to share with us more of the work that you have done. I now have the honor of introducing Ms. Susanna Philippe, Executive Director from Women Enable International. Susanna, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this important discussion. I'm happy to be here as a civil society representative of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership. A key commitment of our Action Coalition is to fund and support diverse feminist activists, organizations, funds, and movements. This is not just about increased funding, but about better funding, coupled with the supports needed to build and sustain an intersectional feminist movement, to bring diverse voices into the movement, and to ensure the cross-movement solidarity that's necessary to realizing the promise of the SDGs. To achieve this aim, our Action Coalition is establishing a global alliance for sustainable feminist movements. This is a multi-stakeholder initiative that will work to increase, sustain, and improve financial and political support for feminist organizations, leaders, and movements. In the years since the Generation Equality Forum, the planning and reference groups of the Global Alliance have been engaged in a co-creation process to design the Alliance's objectives, the theory of change, and the governance structures and practices. As it's gotten off the ground, the Alliance leaders have observed, unsurprisingly, that the funding landscape and barriers for feminist movements and organizations vary dramatically depending on their focus, the leadership, geographic location, and other factors. And so we realize that the success of this alliance hinges on our ability to speak to these imbalances. So one concrete step that the planning group and secretariat have taken in this regard is to ensure that the work of the alliance is grounded in feminist values, such as care, language justice, time justice, accessibility, and power sharing. In practice, that's meant offering materials and meetings in multiple languages, alternative formats, with closed captioning, scheduling meetings and events across time zones or prioritizing regions where they have typically been excluded, such as the Pacific region, and adapting consultation plans as disruptions from COVID, conflict, and other global and local events have necessarily taken priority. The Alliance will be officially launched later this year, and it will be working to build back better by increasing and improving the quality of resources, including but not limited to financial resources, supporting feminist movements and agendas, and mobilizing partnerships and political support for diverse feminist movements, agendas, and policies. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susanna, for sharing with us the better funding grounded in feminist principles. And we look forward to hear more about the work that you're doing. I now have the honor of inviting Amelia Reges, co-convener of the Women's Working Group on Finance for Development. Amelia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak in this event, and especially welcoming the reason that is bringing us here, which is discussing the power of partnerships. And this is very important to us as co-leads and part of the CSOs in the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. And I want to say this because rather than speaking on what the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development has been doing, or the amazing work that my colleagues in the civil society space have been doing, we want to refer collectively about the issue that UN Women announced that it signed a memorandum of understanding with BlackRock on May 25 in this very same year. They said that it is meant to cooperate in promoting the growth of genderless investing. But to be frank, in a time of climate, environmental, health, political, and economic crisis, a partnership that with an entity that is actively undermining international commitments to advance sustainable development is a serious aberration. BlackRock has been refusing to divest from fossil fuels, and even last year it was investing even more for future assets managing on coal companies. BlackRock is also the leading non-holder of external private debt in the Global South. It has voted every single time in resolutions related to labor rights where it has shareholding, and it has voted against resolutions including related to corporate accountability for sexual harassment. And through its investment strategies, BlackRock is also a major supporter of the military industrial complex. So we understand that member states are not fulfilling their financial commitments to fund the UN. And this is also part of the larger conversation on partnerships, right? Because it is about what are the role of each of us as actors. But what we understand is that the lack of public funding for UN entities is also a major driver of the corporate capture of the UN, weakening this capacity to face the multilateral crisis of our time. And in moments such as this one, when we are aiming at sustainability, resilience for gender equality, the navigation for rapidly changing times cannot be done at the expense of the values, at the expense of the very own agenda we claim to aim. And it is, I think, a very good space here to discuss the need for UN Women to rescind its partnership with BlackRock and to commit to fulfill its mandate in the partnership with the actors that are really committed to promote women's human rights and gender equality.
Thank you, Emilia. Thank you very much for your intervention, and we look forward to talk to you a little bit more in the next segment. I now invite Ms. Katherine Townsend, Director of Policy from Webb Foundation. Katherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you all for having me here, and thank you for those most recent interventions. So it's very important and strong points. I wanted to say about the work that we're doing is that it is not a technology problem, but it's people problems. The question is whether there is the courage to put women, girls, and other minoritized genders and minoritized people first. Unfortunately, at the moment, the vision of the web as described by the inventor of the web and the founder of our organization, a free, open, and trusted place for creativity and sharing of ideas for everyone around the world, is in real jeopardy. We're following this familiar pattern of pooling wealth into the hands of the few, exploiting any who are susceptible to mis and disinformation, and taunting, harassing, and violating women, and primarily women of color. We know that when women and other minoritized genders are harassed, their response is rarely to seek support from platforms or from the police. Rather, their decision is to pull their profile offline. So we're losing the presence of women online. And what we're creating is a web and internet, an online space that is increasingly only friendly to those who are accustomed to holding power and who are comfortable committing violence. This is not only a very boring future, but it is a very dangerous one. So what can this Action Coalition do? Well, we can ensure that the consultations for the Global Digital Compact include voices and participation of minoritized genders, of youth, of feminist technologists, and privacy advocates around the world. Second, as announced last year at the Generation Equality Forum, the Webb Foundation is working with tech platforms to implement changes. So we must keep the pressure and engagement with social media platforms, dating apps, gaming, ride sharing, other companies where online harassment is rampant and where their business models benefit from allowing or ensuring that violence can continue. Third, we must ensure government regulations are passed and upheld to hold companies accountable. We do this with multi-stakeholder collaborations, partnerships with governments, and also strengthening our education pipeline so that we have a network of data-ready, ethics-trained, civic-minded technologists ready to join our governments and join our civil society organizations. And finally, as we work to strengthen and support civil society around the world, whose work needs so much more support in the wake of the pandemic, we must work together to collect and share data about the extent of the problems of harassment and violence online. Tech platforms have this information, and they've said their hands are tied. They do not have permission to share it. So we here on this call know that we do not change what we do not measure. And so for CSW 67, for the Global Digital Compact, and to solve these problems, we must work with feminist civil society organizations around the world to get an independent data set to measure the extent of this harassment and to drive change. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Katherine. Thank you for your intervention. An area which we do not discuss a lot, but I mean, we look all of us forward for our roundtable where you can talk more about this. Well, again, thank you very much to the 8 guest speakers. And now we're going to have an opportunity to hear more about each one of them on this roundtable that we're going to have with the 8 of them. And I will start by posing questions to each one of them and asking them also to look after the 3-minute slot that you have been given. So I will start with Margaret Kobia, from the Cabinet Secretary from the Government of Kenya. So Margaret, the Government of Kenya have announced, as you well mentioned before, 12 ambitious commitments on GBV in Paris. So can you enhance what progress has been made on this inspiring agenda, and what lessons are being learned about the implementation of a multi-stakeholder approach to addressing GBV against women and girls in all their diversity? And how can these lessons support efforts to accelerate action to end violence against women and girls in all their diversity in the context of recovery from COVID-19 pandemic? Margaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. As we mark 1 year since we handed the 12 commitment, we have made progress as follows. First, gender-based violence indicators on implementation of laws have been incorporated in performance contracting, where all ministries, departments, and agencies have to report quarterly on how they are implementing the laws as one of the commitments. 2, previous commitments have not been fulfilled because we lack funding. In this matter, under GEF, investment in gender-based violence by Kenyan government in the tune of $1.3 million, and also through development partners who have contributed $1.2 and more so coordinated by UN Women Kenya Country Office, who have brought all development partners together to give us some funding to be able to implement the GEF plan. We have also come up with guidelines on establishing gender-based violence recovery centers, thus facilitating the process of setting up fully operational centers across the country of 47 counties. We have also launched gender mainstreaming policy by private sector. For the very first time, private sector, through GF, they have been able to come up with a policy which focuses on gender-based violence. That is, implementation of this policy will contribute to meeting the target both at private and at also government level on gender-based violence. On gender-based survivors fund, several societies of organizations have also been able to establish specific funds to work around gender-based violence. And also, this initiative that is also expected to contribute in building back better, especially post-COVID-19 pandemic. We have also decided Gender Equality Forum to be localized in our 45 devolved counties. And this, we have signed various memorandum of understanding to ensure that the counties are focused. It's only when we achieve at the national level, at the ground level, then we can be able to celebrate the 12 commitment. We have lessons learned, yes. We know political will, especially in Kenya, where exactly the president championed these 12 commitments. We have seen governments come together to provide leadership in the implementation of the GAF. We have also seen we have partnership and the coordination is very key. We have also seen working together and being able to link. You cannot just focus on gender-based violence alone. We realize also leadership matters, economic empowerment matters, women in peace and security matters. So we must ask ourselves, what is the key impactful thematic area that can bring all together? Finally, we have seen negative cultural practices are the main cause of gender-based violence. Can we have a more combative way of dealing with gender-based cultural norms that promote gender-based violence? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for sharing what the government of Kenya has been doing in these very ambitious commitments related to GBV. I now have the pleasure of introducing Aishka Najib from the Youth Climate Leader of Fridays for Future. Aishka, from your perspective as a youth leader for the Feminist Action for Climate Justice and Fridays for the Future, most affected peoples in areas, what are the key challenges that should be addressed to ensure a green recovery from COVID-19 that centers on women and girls?
Firstly, I would like to thank you, Lorena, for that question. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate and biodiversity crisis are interconnected. From mounting disasters to economic insecurity, women and girls are amongst those most impacted by climate change. And they are amongst those most impacted by the added economic impacts of COVID-19. Therefore, climate change mitigation and adaptation measures that center the leadership of young women and girls in all the diversity should be at the heart of COVID-19 green recovery plans. In order to even begin addressing the climate crisis, the disproportionately impacted should lead the way in key dialogues and climate and biodiversity negotiations that are essential to a green recovery. Yet, women's leadership and voices remain underrepresented at the UNFCCC Conference of Parties, and these decision-making spaces continue to relegate young people to the margins. We need resources and access to meaningfully participate. Due to gender-segregated employment, discrimination, and traditional beliefs, women and especially youth are also often excluded from the rapidly expanding green economy. The sustainability of green jobs depends both on their environmental benefits as well as their social content, particularly their contribution to increasing social equity. This is why we should also include youth in all their diversity as key stakeholders and partners in the development of gender-sensitive recovery plans and policies. And we need to follow the resources and money. The pandemic remained a pandemic because the global north refused to support mass vaccination in the south and hoarded vaccines and technology. And the climate crisis will remain the climate crisis if the global north continue to ignore their historic responsibility and continue to expand fossil fuel projects and unsustainable consumption. We need to speed up divesting from fossil fuels and ensure gender responsive financing for a green recovery that is inclusive of the global south and budget for climate and biodiversity resilient solutions that link gender and intergenerational equity across sectors. We witnessed loss and damages being taken off the agenda from negotiating rooms. And when we call for reparations, it's followed by a defense of it's not agreed language. But these are not mere concepts for us. It's a matter of life or death, as the climate crisis is now, and it's already impacting thousands. So join us in the call for people over profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you for your perspective as a youth leader on such important matters. I now would like to give the floor to Mark Malok Brown, President of Open Society Foundations. And Mark, I mean, the research is clear. Feminist movements in their diversities are critical to the promotion and realization of social justice and gender equality. And these movements both serve communities in practical ways and hold states accountable for fulfilling their obligations to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights without discrimination. Yet we know that women's rights movements are significantly underfunded. And how is the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership addressing this issue? And what messages are needed to ensure sustainable feminist movements and supported to accelerate progress on SDG 5?
Thank you. And, you know, I have to say 75% of our own $100 million pledge is going to the support of feminist movements and leadership, precisely because we accept the logic of that question. This really is core to securing the sort of structural transformational change around the inclusion of women, you know, which is only going to come from pressing women into an equal share of political leadership, if you like. And I mean, we're all very familiar with the figures that less than a quarter of ministers around the world are women, 26% of parliamentarians, only 6% of heads of state, although there have been some very remarkable ones, as we heard referred to earlier. So, you know, for us going forward, this is absolutely the key place we want to put our effort. And, you know, we are planning to launch by the end of the year a $25 million fund around women's, called the Women's Political Leadership Fund. And I think working both with UN Women, but with so many other groups on this call, we and all of the others in this grouping devoted to promotion of women in political leadership, you know, recognize that, you know, it's a very real pressing challenge. Far from winning the battle in many countries, we're actually going backwards at the moment. So we must all press forward together on this.
Thank you very much, Mark, for sharing even the future commitments of the Open Society Foundation. I now have the honor of introducing Madame Bineta Diop, Special Envoy for Women's Peace and Security for the African Union and the convener of the African Women Leaders Network. Bineta, in May of 2022, the number of people forced to flee conflict, violence, human rights violations, and persecution had surpasses 100 million. How can the compact ensure that women and girls are at the center of prevention and peace-building efforts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Africa is the continent that has been so much exposed by conflict and the consequences on women and children. And that's why we, the African Union, have taken the ownership of Resolution 1325. We can say right now we are the continent that have adopted more national action plan. 30 countries have already, and we see growing in the few years to come. But what we did for accountability is to put in place a continental result framework, a system to measure progress. This is new, with member state accountability to tell them, how are you including women and girls in the 3 Ps, and participation, prevention, and prevention, peace building. So that is, and we have issue with the indicators that we know on emerging threat, including COVID, but new threat like climate change and so on. So we are publishing report, measuring the progress. That is what is new in our continent. But let me just tell that we are now facing three crises in the continent, which is related to the Ukraine as well, exacerbated by the Ukraine crisis, is fuel, food, and finance. Those 3 crises are everywhere in Africa. So what we have done this continent is the head of states have dedicated, for example, 2022 after COVID, to strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security in the African continent. We wanted to see how women benefit from, the agriculture sector, but other. So it's a priority for us. The AU also have declared 2020 to 2030 the decade for women, financial inclusion, and economic empowerment. And we are measuring the progress. It should not be just a declaration, but an implementation plan that we are working on this. And maybe lastly is also the positive masculinity. We have seen COVID where women have been what we call the silent pandemic, is violence against women. So we had the leaders of the continent discussing about VAUG. There's the first time that male at the leadership position, the male sitting head of state to discuss violence against women. And we will continue. Senegal will be hosting the next conference with the President Macky Sall, President Tshisekedi, and others, Ramaphosa, to continue to discuss how do we take concrete action on violence against women. So now the question that women are always raising, where are the pledges that have been promised during this conference? Who is accountable? Who is monitoring the implementation? We rightly say we monitor the implementation by our member states. We monitor how women are included in the process. But the pledges that have been made that Mark Malok just highlighted some of them, where are those pledges and how is going to impact on the women's ordinary life of the citizen, of the women of Africa, but of the world? That's the question, maybe this roundtable.
Thank you, Madam. Yeah, I mean, you're pretty on the spot on that. Sometimes we have a lot of agreements, but very little action when it comes to implementation. I now have the honor of bringing back to our panelists, Ms. Rachel Snow, Chief Population and Development Branch from UN FPA. And Rachel, how can we collectively navigate the turbulent times and the regress we're witnessing when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights? Across the world, what are your most concern regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights, and what progress gives you hope?
Well, it's a wide range of challenges. I think, as we're well aware, both political, also in terms of health sector, as climate change, et cetera, and indeed kind of peaking with the pushback against women's gender equality and reproductive rights. I want to focus on knowledge and information, in some respects picking up where Katherine Townsend intervened a few minutes ago, and the challenge of so much misinformation and the global trend to digitization on everything. And at the same time, a lack of real clarity of what are reliable sources of information. And I think it's one very concrete area where we see a deficit within the sexual and reproductive health and rights community. I honestly feel. You look at right now, the estimate that UN Women gave us this year, that on the SDG 5 indicators, we have 48% adequate data. This is just a serious shortfall for all of us, because I work mostly with governments, UNFPA, in the data sector, trying to strengthen government capacity for the census, civil registration, making sure those data are available. And there are very significant deficits there. So, and then let alone what we would want is that the civil society sector is extremely conversant and agile on data, so that they indeed can in turn hold government accountable for all the progress points we're talking about. And I think we have to recommit to building the digital platforms, to sharing effectively guidelines on data governance, that yes, the Global Digital Compact, there's also a data governance movement that is emerging within the UN itself. The SGs, Secretary Generals, committed to having a big data portal, UNFPA has portals, UNICEF, WHO, etc. I think we want to really encourage us all to embrace the modern opportunities on the digital revolution, seize more power in that space, police it, yes, I think as Katherine so eloquently spoke to, but we need to build capacity so that we can all use it with our allies most effectively ourselves. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your intervention. We are indeed facing turbulent times and regress on these elements. I want now to invite Susanna Philippe, Executive Director from Women Enable International. Susanna, intersectionality is a key principle of the Action Coalition on Feminist Movements and Leadership. And as a representative of Women Enable International, how do you believe feminist movements strengthen their alliances to foster the inclusion of diverse feminist voices and solidarity with aligned movements?
Okay, thanks so much for that question. You know, when we talk about building intersectional movements, I think it's really essential that we focus on what meaningful participation looks like. As I mentioned earlier, I think one of the really central pieces of this is recognizing the power imbalances that have emerged from historic exclusion, exploitation, discrimination, and as Rachel was just alluding to, the lack of data, and in particular, the lack of disaggregated data that really drives home what are the imbalances that are there, and taking proactive steps to dismantle the barriers that perpetuate such exclusion. So this means it's not enough to just provide a seat at the table. We have to actively work to create accessible and inclusive spaces where we're sharing power, where we're recognizing and valuing the different forms of knowledge and expertise that people bring to the table based on their lived experiences, where we acknowledge the interconnectedness of our struggles against different systems of oppression. So one of the ways that we at Women Enabled International have been working to achieve this aim is by organizing and convening a diverse group of feminists with disabilities to participate in the generation equality process. These are voices that have been largely excluded from mainstream feminist and disability rights movements because of stigma and discrimination based on disability, gender, and other intersecting identities. The Inclusive Generation Equality Collective is seeking to harness that untapped power of the more than 150 women, girls, and gender diverse people with disabilities who are making up its membership. By ensuring that every meeting is offering closed captioning, international sign interpretation, Spanish-English interpretation, we've been able to really include feminists with disabilities with diverse impairments and across a range of regions to actively participate in the collective's work and to step up into leadership roles within that space. And we're actively working to increase the membership of feminists with disabilities from underrepresented areas to ensure that the collective is bringing forward the voices of the most historically excluded and creating pathways to bring those voices into these processes where they have a seat at the table and where their voices are really heard. And so we're utilizing this collective to hold actors accountable from an intersectional perspective on the implementation of their obligations and commitments towards gender equality. In this way, feminists with disabilities are not just seeking participation in the feminist movement, but really leadership. So not just the recognition of our issues as important, but the prioritization of the issues that matter to us and as equal and full participants in these feminist spaces. Beyond the gender and disability intersection, it's really important that we recognize that true equality requires dismantling the interconnected and intersecting structures of oppression. We need to be open to broadening our own agendas and seeking out allies in aligned movements, economic rights, climate justice, anti-racism work, because advancing equality and justice at these intersections are really essential to achieving gender justice for all. And recognizing these linkages will allow us to harness our collective power. And I think a key, sorry, just if I could add one more thing, I think it's really important that we not be afraid to get it wrong. If we're open to learning and listening and being comfortable with being told that we're wrong, And I think we can make really tremendous strides to building inclusive, intersectional, and ultimately more impactful movements. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you very much for your intervention. Very enlightening, definitely on the way and things that we need to move forward in this topic of intersectionality. And I really like your position of it's okay if we're wrong. I mean, we're learning and creating in lots of ways in this respect. Now I have the honor to introduce Amelia Reges, co-convener of Women Working Group on Financing and Development. Emilia, how do we ensure economic resilience of women and girls in the face of continuing crisis? And how will the generation equality process be central to addressing the challenges associated with such crisis?
Yes, thank you so much, Lorena, for this question. I think this is one of the most important ones, right? Because the feminist movement has built all of this knowledge precisely that has led to the real transformations on gender equality and women's human rights on the ground. So the real question is, how are we willing to listen to what the feminist movement is saying? And this is key, because what the feminist movement globally has been calling for is, for instance, canceling the debt, support for developing countries to overcome their barriers through public services that are so key for gender equality, right? So we are not calling for gender bonds. We are not calling for more debt tools. We are not calling for gender impact investments in alliances just to pinkwash corporate entities, right? The feminist movement has been calling for systemic reforms that are needed in the macroeconomic agenda to ensure the public sphere is in capacity to deliver. So we are not calling for the financialization of care. There seems to be a misconnect between what the feminist movement is calling precisely for what you're saying, because these are the voices on the ground of what are the dreams of women and girls and what are we envisioning, and the proposals we hear on the other end are totally dissonant with what we are aiming at, right? So towards the future, though, we would like to hear a real commitment to qualitative partnerships. Partnerships can go either way, right? So the power of partnerships lie in the principles that are their basis. So I'm just thinking back to the partnership with BlackRock. On behalf of the civil society co-leads of the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition, we will submit a letter to UN Women in the upcoming days, to UN Women's ED, to generate an open dialogue with many actors that have women's human rights at heart and gender equality at heart. We think as well that the UN as a whole should not be to be reminded of its mandate by observers, right? Its governance systems should incorporate civil society leaders to help prevent these mistakes. But moreover, again, going back to the true nature of the feminist demands that are promoting real transformation, we would like this agenda not to be toned down by pinkwashing efforts, as we call it, for some corporate actors who are taking the opportunity of expanding their negative impacts on our name. And what we want to say is, not in our name, we won't give up on our beautiful planet. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Emilia. Gracias for your intervention. I now pass the floor to Katherine Townsend, Director of Policy from Webb Foundation. So, Katherine, the Action Coalition aims to unlock the benefits of emerging technologies while preventing their negative impacts. From your perspective, how can the coalition support mobilization efforts ahead of CSW 67 and the negotiation of the Global Digital Compact to ensure gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment is prioritized by all stakeholders?
Okay, thank you so much for the question and for all the information and interventions that have been shared thus far. For that, I want to say, there's a phrase that we use often: listen to women. And I just add to that, listen to global women. We cannot work toward a world in person or online that is being built and designed without global collaboration and global development. And this must be the foundational approach for the Global Digital Compact, for CSW, for all our partnerships and our efforts. I want to recognize that in study after study, the online experience of harassment, it's widespread and it's rampant. An economist study, our own work with our network of feminist tech organizations called Women's Rights Online, found that 80% of women report an experience of violation and harassment online. 80%. And it's important to understand that one of the reasons for this is that the tools and platforms we used are not designed with a feminist and inclusive lens. These businesses can have people within them who want to make change and do good work, but fundamentally their business models benefit from harassment and violence. And so what we need and what we're working toward in the long term is a critical mass of workers within these companies, in the governments regulating them, in civil society holding them accountable, and doing the good work at the front lines who have equal footing in data literacy, in technical capacity, and in a shared open data set to recognize the extent of the problem and work towards solutions. With these different sectors in partnership with each other, then we'll be able to have a more equitable world online and offline. So this next year, the priority theme for CSW 67 is innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for advancing gender equality and empowerment. So as the Action Coalition works towards identifying and supporting these education interventions, we must ensure that the education platforms that we are supporting, that we're promoting, are designed with those principles in mind, with feminist principles and with feminist leadership. They also really need to be tested with civil society technology groups on the front lines around the world, not just created in one country and scaled out to others. Because without this global co-creation, unwittingly, unknowingly, we will be supporting platforms that continue to cause harms. But if we do it well, we will be supporting a pipeline of a generation of feminist technologists empowered to choose their own path, to express themselves online, and to serve in leadership roles in these organizations. And if you all are interested in that work and interested in data work, you have my contact, and I am happy to follow up with anyone on this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. And I'm sure a lot of us are going to contact you after this event. So now I have the EDO from UN Women that will come briefly to comment on some of the different comments that have been done by previous speakers. EDO, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lorena. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I just wanted to say that, with respect to the earlier question on BlackRock, we have heard the CSO concerns and we will respond to them, and we will look forward to discussing with them shortly. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and back to you.
Lorena, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you for your words and to address the issue that has been raised. I think we're almost at the end of our event. I don't think we'll have time to take or respond to any questions that we have on the chat. I want to share my appreciation and recognition for the ongoing engagement from all the partners and the unique multi-stakeholder partnership model that Generation Equality represents. And I also want to echo the ED's call for action with member states for continued commitment, ownership, and investment into generation equality. As well, to reiterate that UN Women believes it is the collective effort exhibited by partners that will overcome pressing challenges and continue to deliver on and champion the ambition promises made to women and girls 1 year ago in Paris toward acceleration of the SDGs 5 and the overall 2030 agenda. I also want to invite you to the recent report from the government responses to COVID-19, Lessons on Gender Equality for a World in Turmoil, that is being launched by UNDP and UN Women, or was launched on the 23rd of June, or that will be launched, I'm sorry, on the 23rd of June of 2023. So on behalf of UN Women, France, and Mexico, we want to thank you all for your participation, your wisdom, your knowledge, but far more, your commitment to gender equality. So thank you very much. I don't know if somebody from UN Women wants to say something else. Otherwise, we close this event. Well, thank you then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your participation and looking forward to see you in our next conversations. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you, Lorena.
Thank you.